Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm gonna give you my new updated Caro-Kann repertoire, something I've been working on for a while now, and basically this is the repertoire I would play today in a tournament game if I had the Caro-Kann. So it's gonna be fresh, it's gonna be new, you're gonna see some ideas that you haven't encountered before, and it will likely confuse your e4 opponents, put them on the defensive, or at least get them out of book. The repertoire is based on uncommon but sound ideas that give black excellent attacking chances. The full Caro-Kann repertoire is available as a pre-made repertoire for black on Chessbook. If you want to simply import it, go to the pre-made repertoires and do that. And of course you can also download the PGN following the link in the description and import it on your own. On Chessbook you can import, add to your repertoire and study your repertoire very effectively. If you want to edit something else, you can use shortcuts to specific variations I'm going to show you in the video. And if you would like to study your repertoire, well, Chessbook, in my opinion, is the best tool for that. You can see the effectiveness of the repertoire, and I'm very happy that it's very high. So 98% against people my own level, meaning 2000 FIDE. It's really sound. Well, not as much as the Berlin, let's say, but it's sound since we are not playing the main lines. And you can study your repertoire by going through everything that's due for review, recommended moves, and you can also get example games in the Caro-Kann. Chessbook, in my opinion, is the best tool for studying openings. Follow the link in the description and check out Chessbook if you haven't yet. The repertoire is also available on my Patreon page, so visit the link in the description. You can buy it separately from the shop, or you can become a member on Patreon, support the channel for $3 a month and gain access to over 500 posts and many pre-made repertoires you can then import on Chessbook or to Lichess and learn from, such as the English, the Bird, a full E4 repertoire, a full Sicilian repertoire, and there will be many more to come. Let's go back to the Caro-Kann. Now let's start with the classical Caro-Kann. We're going to cover every possible way for white to fight against the Caro-Kann. We are going to start with the most common ones. So after d4, d5, what if white plays knight c3? Well, most people will take on e4. Most people who play e4 will know d takes e4. We are not going to do that. We are going to play the Gurgenidze system, something I have employed successfully in 2 tournament games so far. I had a win against a low-rated opponent and a draw against a FIDE master. They were both relatively confused with the opening. So the Gurgenidze system is interesting because it challenges the d-pawn, and most importantly, it does not allow white to move away the knight from c3 and then play c3, solidifying that pawn. Of course, if we take on e4, then the knight moves, then the c-pawn is mobile, it's flexible. So throughout the video, I'm going to focus on ideas, patterns, and concepts you must know to play these variations successfully. And, well, in the description below you can find the actual theory, a lot more than I'm going to show throughout the video. So against g6, white has a couple of options. The 2 most popular ones are h3 or knight f3, they will transpose, or advancing the pawn to e5. Advancing the pawn to e5 leads to the most thematic type of Gurgenidze positions, where white is going to go f4 and build this very, very strong center, but we are going to play around that and use the squares white has left behind. So bishop g7, f4, and now we play h5. Our idea is to exchange the slight squared bishop for a knight on f3, plant a knight on f5, advance the pawn to h4, and control all the key squares on the king side and in the center. So one of the most common lines goes knight f3. We could now go bishop g4 straight away, but I prefer going knight h6 first, and after something like bishop e3, bishop g4, h3, takes, h4. And now you see the type of position we are trying to get. After, let's say, bishop d3, e6, we want to have a knight on f5, we want to control g3, we want to prevent white from having a comfortable position on the king side. So even though people will most commonly castle here, castle short, that's very, very risky. And I suggest to move knight f5 here. Well, if white takes this, the g file opens. And we can also choose, if bishop takes, to take with the e pawn. And that's a different type of position, which is fairly complex strategically. And your strategic goal will be to get this knight to d6, so to set up a blockade. So I would recommend, for easier navigation of the position, to recapture with the g pawn, open up the g file, and play against white's king. That being said, white can also castle queenside, which is risky for different reasons. White can continue with moves like knight e2 or g4. But in any case, it's a very rich position in which black is perfectly fine according to the engine, that doesn't resemble the classical Caro-Kann at all. So after g6, if white chooses not to play e5 and this type of position, white's going to go h3 or knight f3. Once again, these are going to transpose. So we go bishop g7, and now we've set up a threat. So if white makes a random move like, I don't know, a3, then we take, and take on d4. So white has a choice, either e5 or defend the pawn. Most people are going to play knight f3 defending. The reason h3 is played is, if you know the Spanish, where white plays bishop b5, pinning the knight on c6 and attacking the pawn on e5, this is basically the same position. If black was allowed to play bishop, in this case g4, you can notice that this is basically a Spanish structure. Let's say this is e4, this is e5, this is knight c6, this is a6. The reason why black plays a6 in the Spanish is to save the pawn on e5. In this case, h3 was played to save the pawn on d4. I had a game where white did not play h3. White played knight f3, and after bishop g7, white continued with bishop e3, and I just played bishop to g4. And, excuse me, now you have an unpleasant choice. I mean, what do? Bishop e2? So this pawn is under pressure. Therefore, white is most commonly going to play h3, preventing our idea. Knight f3, and now the point behind this line of the Gurgenidze is to exchange and go knight f6. Now what we want is to get rid of the main weakness in most Caro-Kann positions, the e5 square, so we recapture with the e pawn. That may seem strange, but we have an open e-file, we have a very comfortable square on e6 for our bishop, the knight's coming most likely to d5. I'm going to explain that maneuver later. And this pawn does an excellent job of controlling these two squares. Most players who play e4, when they play against the Caro-Kann, they enjoy this pressure on e5. Without that, it's much harder for them to play. For a better understanding of this exact position and the types of middle games you get, I would recommend looking at Wei Yi's games. He is the strongest player who plays this all the time, and some of his ideas I've introduced into my own repertoire. White has a couple of options here, bishop d3, bishop c4, let's say bishop c4, castles, castles. And the last part I would really love to show you here is playing a5. Now, the reason we play a5 is to be able to transfer this knight to c7. In some cases, this knight will be on d5. In some cases, it will sit on b4, depending on whether white plays a3, c3, or a4, or just ignores you. But this is a square for the knight. And if white wishes to have an active position, this bishop is coming to f4. And when our knight reaches d5, that bishop will have to choose a diagonal. Let me show you why that's important. Let's just say a4, knight a6, c3 defending the b4 square, knight c7, bishop f4, and knight d5. You have a choice. If you play bishop h2 or bishop g3, you are never putting pressure on my king side with that bishop. If you play bishop d2, you are never defending your king side with that bishop. So this move, knight d5, forces a decision from white. So after something like bishop h2, bishop e6, I don't know, white has many moves, but white's position is worse than black's from a human perspective, and I'm going to try to explain why. These two bishops influence the queen side, and our king is perfectly safe. So when the time comes and we are able to undermine this structure, there are going to be many, many weaknesses on white's queen side, and that's exactly how I got a very good position against a French FIDE master in a tournament I played a few months back. I had a winning position, but I drew because I didn't know how to win. That's a different story. So the Gurgenidze is a very, very interesting alternative to the main lines. Now let's continue with positions in the advance. Now, in the advanced variation, I would recommend the move bishop f5, but thus far I've been playing my old repertoire with ideas that are common and strategically complex. I have completely changed my approach to the advance for this revamped Caro-Kann repertoire. So let's look at the short variation first. So knight f3, e6, bishop e2. So far I would always go knight d7 or knight e7. I'm going to show you an alternative that's extremely interesting and very sharp. c5 immediately. As in the French, in this f7, e6, d5 structure, you want to play c5 and attack the pawn on d4. Even though your bishop isn't on c8, the French and the advanced Caro-Kann have many things in common. Now, as I said, the theory is all available in detail in the actual repertoire. You can get in the description, but the main idea is to put pressure on d4, and white can castle, white can, play bishop e3. There are many options, but if they do play bishop e3, which is the most common move, we now play queen b6. Increasing the pressure on d4 and putting pressure on d2. Now, white really should not try to defend that pawn. Let's say b3 is played. Black is already significantly better, and this is not only a waste of time, but it's a weakness we can try to exploit. After something like knight c6 castles, for example, we take on d4, knight d4, knight d4, bishop d4, bishop c5. There's no reason for this pawn to be on b3, and let's say the bishop retreats. We can just go knight e7, get the other knight to c6, f4 has been prevented, and we can undermine b3 with our a pawn later on. So most people who know what they're doing are going to play the move knight c3, and after knight c6, we are now threatening to take that pawn. And once again, if you play b3, now you are very much losing because of takes and bishop b4 and queen a5. The knight is pinned, so this isn't an option. If you play rook b1, then we have the move bishop e4. This is an incredible resource which threatens to undermine this pawn. So after something like takes, knight to d2, we now take on d4, and we have a great position. So white needs to be careful, and white needs to start developing their pieces. So the best move is to castle and to give up the pawn. Now mind you, white is slightly better, but we are up a pawn, and the knight's hanging. So let's say, I don't know, queen e1, for example, exchange on d4, bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop b4. This is all theory, and again, you can learn on all the lines when you look at the repertoire yourselves. But what I'm going to tell you is that in most cases, when you go into this line, if white knows what they're doing, you're going to keep your extra pawn. It's not going to be a safe extra pawn, but it's going to be an extra pawn. And if white doesn't know what they're doing, you can just gain a massive edge with moves like b3 or rook b1, which just waste time. Now let's move on to the Tal. Once again, we go into the advance, and they play h4. Now, so far, I've been playing h5 or h6. h6 is uncommon, h5 is the main line. Now we're going to go for something completely different, and I guarantee that most people will have no idea what you're doing. We're going to play queen b6 straight away. Now, this move is a multi-purpose move. Firstly, it allows for a bishop retreat in the event of g4, which is one of the most common ways for white to play from here. We haven't played e6, so we are ready to accept a sort of bayonet attack position. or a French position with our bishop stuck inside the pawn chain, but we have a ton of counterplay on the queen side in exchange for that. Alternatively, white can play a4 or knight c3 or, you know, normal moves like knight f3, but this queen is going to annoy them in most lines. So the best way to play is g4, and we retreat the bishop. White, let's say, continues h5, although there are alternatives like knight c3, e6, and so on. We are now in a French. We will play c5 and put pressure on the pawn on d4 and prevent this bishop from developing comfortably. That's the idea. But from a practical standpoint, what we achieve with queen b6 is that we get white out of their comfort zone, out of normal Tal territory where white is used to, you know, playing for the g5 square and so forth. So if they play g4, which is the main move, then bishop d7. If they don't play g4, if they play knight c3, let's say, then we can transpose to the normal Tal lines and play h5. This is my weapon of choice. And after something like knight g2, we go e6. And okay, we have at least prevented bishop g5 due to queen b2, because c2 is hanging, but and it's not going to be as different to the usual Tal, but it's still going to mean that white is usually out of book. The bayonet, another variation in the advance, is a very tricky opening, and up until now I've always been recommending the move bishop d7, but I did a lot of research on a very provocative way to play against this. Now, the bayonet is becoming more and more popular on all levels, and I'd only faced it once in a tournament game and I won, but I didn't feel comfortable. So instead of retreating and accepting a French, we are going to play the riskiest possible line against it. Bishop e4. f3, of course. Bishop g6, and now white has a choice, h4, which we are going to meet with h5, developing with knight e2 and knight f4, or playing e6. Now h4 and knight e2 are not critical moves, so let's look at e6, although I have covered those two moves in the repertoire. So normally here you would, you know, play queen d6. If you've seen my videos on the h6 style, but it's a similar idea where you don't want your e-pawns doubled, and most importantly, you don't want the g6 square weak so that you don't get mated, so you play queen d6. But now we're going to take that pawn. Now let me explain why this is okay for black. I've always dreaded these positions, but they are perfectly fine if you know what you're doing. What you're playing for is a very, very early queen d6, giving your king squares on d7 and d8, most commonly d8. Then you want to go knight d7, and you want to undermine the pawn on d4 and play e5 twice. So for now we have doubled e-pawns, and our king is about to get misplaced. I'm going to show you how. But we're going to get rid of both of our e-pawns and get a very comfortable position where white has overextended on the king side. I should say that the engine thinks fe is the best move, even though most people don't play it. But most people don't play it because it's hard to play unless you understand the ideas. So, how does white challenge the g6 square? Well, first of all, they provoke our h-pawn forward, undefending the bishop. So when we play h5, they play bishop d3. Now the bishop's hanging, and if we don't take, let's say we retreat, then rook takes, queen d3 is going to be a disaster, a complete disaster. For example, like here, takes, queen d3, and when we save our rook, let's say here, then g5, and we are busted. So when bishop d3 comes, we exchange. Queen takes. Now white's obviously threatening queen g6, so we play queen d6. And once queen g6 comes, we are playing king d8 and then running away to c7. Knight e2 preparing bishop to f4 in some cases. Knight d7. Now if bishop f4 comes now, we have queen b4 check, take the pawn on b2, so it doesn't work. So queen g6, king d8, and let's say, I don't know, bishop g5, because that's a normal move. Now in this case, we don't play queen b4, because queen b4 runs into knight d2, and if you take the pawn on b2, this is losing, because the rook comes to b1, and your king is overwhelmed. So after bishop g5, we can play the move knight f6, and when white does something, I don't know what, we play e5. And we get rid of our doubled pawns. Now, the only interesting line here is, well, what if white plays f4? f4 is not playable, because we take on g4. That's why we played knight f6. So what if white plays f4 before they play bishop g5? If they play f4 here, we play e5 anyway. And this is the line that justifies this entire variation. If this is taken, we take the queen. And if the queens get traded off, we have enough defense. We have enough defense of e5, and we have just a wonderful position. We're up a pawn, and everything's great. So what we're going to do is we are going to get our queen to d6, move our king to c7, play knight d7, play e5, and then once it's exchanged, so let's say here, we play e5 again. So after e5, let's say white castles, we play king c7, c4, we take on d4, knight takes d4, and e5 again. And the center is gone. It's just black has no weaknesses because of taking on e6. And black is just up a pawn. So against the bayonet, that's what we're going to do. Now, the Van der Wiel is today perhaps a minor sideline, but it used to be the most popular way to play against the Caro-Kann in the 90s before Nigel Short popularized knight f3, so knight c3. And we are going to go e6, white goes g4, and we go bishop g6, they go knight g2. And the idea behind the Van der Wiel is to demolish black's king side and win a pawn. The main move here is c5, and that's what I always used to play. And when you play c5, you get into this long line where after h4 you have to save your bishop, and then the knight comes to f4, you retreat, and the knight takes on h5, attacking g7. Now black has compensation, black is always fine, but white, if they play the Van der Wiel attack, are going to be very much prepared for this. So here's an alternative. Now I have to say, I don't remember being this happy after discovering a new line ever, especially not in the Caro-Kann. Instead of c5, which everyone's going to expect, we are going to go bishop e7. Now what does that move do? Well, it prevents h4. So my question to white is, unless you know the exact theory here, how do you compensate for having a pawn on g4, having a bishop blocked on f1, and having a knight on c3 blocking your c-pawn? Now, I mean, they shouldn't be able to compensate unless they are grandmaster level or unless they know the exact theory. So let's say, since h4 has been prevented, white plays knight f4 because that's a part of their setup. Well, now we can go c5. And after dc, knight c6. And, well, h4 still hangs a pawn. This pawn is hanging, this pawn is hanging. The only downside for black is knight b5, knight d6. So the only tricky line is h4, where I do recommend that you take. White is going to infiltrate on d6. We are not going to retreat and defend. We're going to allow knight d6 check. We're going to go bishop e4. And after knight d6, we move our king to f8. Now black really should exchange on e4, because if they don't, if they, let's say, play f3 is prevented, well, they can move the rook. Let's say they move the rook to g1, we now have queen a5 check, and after c3, queen takes c5, and it's just too much. So even in that line, white should just exchange on e4, and we have a comfortable position where the d6 weakness isn't really a weakness. But most importantly, we've prevented all typical van der Wiel ideas. Moving on, let's have a look at the fantasy. So after f3, I used to play e6 all the time. Then I switched to queen b6 and I played that all the time. My new updated Caro-Kann repertoire goes into the main lines, sort of, but then avoids them. So we're going to take on e4 and play e5. And most e4 players who play the fantasy are going to get really excited that they're getting their, mainline stuff where they play bishop c4 and checkmate us. But we're not going to allow that. So we're going to play the move bishop e6. And I can guarantee that people who aren't very high level, who play the fantasy, are going to get confused because they don't have bishop c4, because their normal attacking ideas simply don't work. If they go knight g5, trying to take this bishop, that's the only seemingly problematic move which the engine hates for white, because we just take a pawn. And this is, why are you down a pawn? So most people are going to go c3, defending the d pawn. Now we play knight d7, and if they go knight g5 now, we can go h6. And if this is taken, we can throw in queen h4 check. And white is very, very close to losing. Very close to losing. If g3, then queen takes e4, and if king e2, then queen takes e4, and then we take the knight. So after knight d7, well, let's say white plays bishop d3, preparing all of that. Now we go bishop d6. Once again, white should castle. If they go knight g5, black is already slightly better. We go knight f6. If they take, we reinforce the center, and we shouldn't be afraid of having doubled e-pawns because they prevent white's center from being mobile. The engine gives this a slightly better for black. So the only seemingly tough move to face, knight g5, which would try to punish the bishop on e6, doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So what is going to end up happening against people who know what they're doing, you're going to get this position, something like this, where black is perfectly fine, white has no attack, there is no typical fantasy pressure on black's king side, and it's just equal. Now let's continue. In the two knights, I used to play bishop g4 all the time. But since we are sort of building a repertoire around g6, I'm going to recommend g6 against the two knights, against the exchange, against the classical. We are playing the Gurgenidze, and we are going to get comfortable playing with a bishop on g7. So against the two knights, we go g6. Again, very rare. No one's going to expect that, and they're going to get confused. Now, white's best move is d4. There's no doubt about that. If white goes d3, playing a Breyer or a King's Indian attack, then they have a knight on c3, and that's no good. So we are most likely going to transpose into the Gurgenidze. After bishop g7, h3, we are now in our Gurgenidze system theory, and we know exactly what to do. White's alternatives, I mean, they really don't exist. They can exchange on d5, and after cd5 play something like bishop b5 check, but that's, I mean, it's a great position for black. And white is stuck with this knight on c3. So against the two knights, we are basically transposing to the Gurgenidze. Now the Breyer. When they play d3, they want to play a King's Indian attack. And we play d5, of course. They go with their knight d2, and they want to go g3, bishop g2, knight f3, King's Indian style. But now we play e5. And after e5, we are not playing a typical Caro-Kann. We are playing a much more active position because our bishop is open and we don't have a pawn on e6. So after knight gf3, we play bishop d6. And white can go d4, white can go g3, most people are going to go g3. Knight f6, bishop to g2, and we castle. And we have a very active position where we are not allowing white to expand easily. we are fighting for the center, we are fighting for the e-file, and now here white has 10 good moves. But the point is we have a healthy position with no bad pieces, no lack of space, and it's just easy to play. The exchange. So when white exchanges and goes bishop d3, we are gonna do something very uncommon once again. So knight c6, c3, all standard so far, but now we play a very rare move, g6. And there are two reasons people play g6. They know what they're doing, or they don't know what they're doing. We are going to focus on the ideas behind g6, and we are going to employ this move to basically prevent any attacking chances white normally gets in the exchange Caro-Kann. In this typical Carlsbad, black's normal plan is the minority attack and white's normal plan is a kingside attack. By playing g6, we have already defended the weakest square, which is h7 in the exchange Caro-Kann, and our plan will be as follows: knight h6, knight f5, knight d6, playing for these two squares. Now, you may have seen me play against the exchange this idea: knight h6, bishop to g7, f6, e5, knight f7, and just playing for e5. That's a good idea unless white knows when to play c4 to weaken this diagonal and expose your king, in which case playing with f6 and knight h6, knight f7 is a bit risky. So what we're going to look at now is risk-free, very rare, and very good. So bishop g7 castles, knight h6. At this point, experienced exchange Caro-Kann players are going to expect f6, knight f7, castles, rook e8, e5, but we are not going to do that. So rook e1, we castle. Now white has many moves here, h3, bishop f4, let's say bishop f4. Now we are going to play the move king h8. Because we want to prepare f6, e5 if allowed, and maybe knight f7, but more importantly just to get away from this diagonal. So let's say queen d2, this is standard attacking the knight, knight f5, knight a3, knight d6. And if white plays knight b5 to challenge our knight, we do not accept that trade. We are going to just defend the c7 square by playing knight e8, chase the knight away, and then get back to d6. So something like this. If h3, a6, the knight drops back, our knight drops back. And let's say knight c2, bishop f5. This is what we want to do. So we want to prevent this pawn from moving easily. We want to control e4, and we want to have very active bishops. So we are going to play something rare in most cases against most variations. But in the exchange, I think we have the most comfortable position in the entire Caro-Kann. I really enjoy this. Now, how are we going to confuse the Panov? Now, when white plays the Panov Botvinnik or the Panov and they play c4, they expect normal moves. Knight f6 followed by e6 or knight f6 followed by c6. We are going to play something that has been played less than 50 times in master games. So, needless to say, white will probably have no idea what's going on. We're going to take. Now, don't be afraid, this isn't unsound, it's perfectly equal according to the engine, and there's a very simple idea behind it. When white takes back, we now go queen c7. And the idea behind queen c7 is to put pressure on both bishops. Now, white has many moves here. Queen b3, queen d3, bishop d3, bishop b3. The most common one is bishop b3, just, retreating the bishop to the most sensible diagonal. And the way we punish this is bishop g4. Now, white really should play f3. There are no other moves, because if they, let's say, play knight f3, we just take, and we take on c1. So, that doesn't work. If they take the bishop, of course, then we take on c1, and we're not winning, but we have a more comfortable position after something like queen d1, king d1. and knight c6, we're just putting pressure on this pawn. So after queen c7, bishop b3, bishop g4, f3, we have now provoked two weaknesses, and we just bring the bishop back to d7. White's going to continue developing, let's say knight e2, e6, and white has to play for d5. This is the way to, I cannot say equalize because white's already equal, it's just equal, but d5 gets rid of this weakness on d4. So if white isn't careful, and you manage to set up a blockade of the d-pawn, then you are going to be much better. Let's say white plays careless moves, let's say castles, knight f6, and let's give white another bad move, like bishop c2. Now we can play knight c6, and now we are already very, very close to being significantly better, because our idea is knight b4, d5. And if this pawn can never move, if we set up a solid blockade, then we're just playing against a static weakness for the rest of the game. And white obviously has no compensation, because in IQP positions, you want this knight on e5, you want to be attacking, and it's clear that white isn't attacking anything. So this taking and queen c7 idea is not new, but it's very rare, and I'm sure you're going to get some very comfortable positions. Accelerated Panov. This is the opening I've been struggling against the most, so I'm going to recommend deviating from the Caro-Kann completely. Now, normally you play d5 here, and you just play a Caro-Kann, but we are going to go into the Old Indian. Why? Because even though the Old Indian is not the optimal opening when you're facing d4, it's very likely you're going to know it much better than your opponent, who firstly probably don't play d4 because they just played e4 or c4, playing the accelerated Panov. And secondly, because even if they do play d4, they see the Old Indian once every 50 games, and you play it all the time. So our idea will be to play e5 d6 instead of d5 e6. And now you can watch my video on the Old Indian if you want to get an idea about this opening. It's completely different to the Caro-Kann. And if you don't want to listen to my advice, then by all means play the normal accelerated Panov. This is just what I've decided to do in the fresh Caro-Kann repertoire. Lastly, let's have a brief look at some minor sidelines. So one sideline that we have to look at is the very popular queen trade offer or endgame offer that occurs in this position. And of course, black can take the queen exchange, and it's known that white has a very comfortable position. So once again, we are going to rely on g6. The difference between this position and the Gurgenidze, let's say, is that the knight isn't on c3, but the pawn is on d3. So white's best is e5, bishop g7, and d4, transposing to the Gurgenidze without the knight on c3. So we are not going to play h5 and knight h6. Instead, we're going to attack the center straight away with f6 and leave white with no alternatives to taking on f6. And we are going to recapture with the e pawn, not with the knight. And now we have an open e-file, which both sides share it. White's likely going to play c3 at some point to defend the pawn, and we have no bad pieces. So this is what I would recommend against this endgame offer. And finally, let's have a look at queen f3, the Goldman. Now, I have struggled against this variation quite a bit. And in my last tournament game where I faced this, I ended up drawing, but I was worse, and it wasn't easy. So what we're going to do is slightly different to what I've been doing so far. We are going to exchange on e4, knight e4, but now knight f6. This is a rare move, and the structure is going to resemble the h3 Gurgenidze, because, I mean, white doesn't have to take. White can play, I don't know, c3, but then we are going to exchange and play queen d5, just offering a queen trade and having a normal Caro-Kann position. Most people are going to take, and we once again recapture with the e-pawn. Now, what does this mean? We are once again controlling these two squares. We don't have to play g6, bishop g7 going into a normal Gurgenidze, although we could, but we have no problems defending e5. You can develop with bishop d6 bishop e6 castles, knight d7, the knight can come to f8 to guard h7 and g6, and it's just a very comfortable, very equal position. And I think it neutralizes all the ideas that white normally gets in the Goldman. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you today. This is the Caro-Kann Repertoire 2.0. I hope you like it. I hope you got some good ideas. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you plan to play or have already played one of these, as well as your experiences with them. Thank you for watching. Once again, the repertoire is in the description below, and I will see you in the next one. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye.